So, welcome. Today we're going to talk about science. I'd like to pretend that I am a scientist, but I'm not. I'm a humble Lincolnshire boy who, at the age of 18, went off to this fantastic institution, the University of Wales, Bangor, as it was then, Bangor University as it is now, to study English Lit. You know, I imagine one or two of us around here have done English. Any Bangor people in the room, by any chance? No? Apart from us? Yeah, cool. Great university. One of the best things about Bangor is that we have an amazing psychology department. It's one of those funny little universities that people have never sort of heard of, or they say, oh, isn't that in America or something? And we're not. We're very much in North Wales. And we have an amazing psychology department which runs lots of projects and has lots of projects based in it. And one of its most exciting projects is the Wales Centre for Behaviour Change. Okay, and we have with us here today, I'll introduce myself in a second, we have Eleanor Heather and Phil Nelson from the Wales Centre for Behaviour Change. Eleanor is, you're kind of an economist more than a psychologist?
I'm not an economist after that background,
yeah.
But I'm an economist who's seen the light of psychology,
yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. So
nudge researcher.
You've been nudged from economics into psychology.
Yeah.
Quite interesting in terms of what Rory was saying earlier about how a lot of behavioural psychologists has attracted economics, but you know it is kind of much more of a psychological discipline.
Yeah.
And Phil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm a behavioural psychologist as well. I work in the Wales Centre for Behaviour Change, and I'm also a PhD student looking at social norms and behaviour change. So I'm very much in this world.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And my name's Bill Hilton, and I am, like I guess most of you guys, I'm a copywriter. I am a freelance, and I have been freelance now for 11 years, I think. And mostly I work for, you know, I've done a lot of the small business stuff and that kind of thing, but mostly these days I work for what I call the big, boring businesses. So the utility companies, insurance companies, been doing a lot of very exciting work this week for insurance companies, telecommunications, things like that. And I'm a freelancer, but I do most of my work through agencies. My biggest agency client is AFIA, the quite well-known copywriting agency. I don't know, is Heather in the room? No, I think she's gone through one of the other ones. We've got Heather Aitchison, who's the creative director of AFIA here today. So mostly I'm working on stuff that is so far below the line it's not even sort of visible. A lot of operational comms, and I guess rather what like a lot of you guys are working on all the time. So I work an awful lot on letters of different types, and not just, you know, your sort of Andy Maslin type sales letters, but your operational, we are sending a guy to read your meter, please make sure that you're in. Your operational, you have not paid your bill from last month, please do so at your earliest convenience. That kind of stuff, okay? So the copy that, it's not glamorous, it's not going to make it to any sort of award ceremony anytime soon, but it's kind of the bread and butter of copywriting every day. And a very common experience that I have, and tell me if this resonates with you, is that an awful lot of decisions about that kind of copy, that everyday operational copy, those kind of decisions often get made on the hoof without any sort of informed decision making, any sort of research. Often it's done on a whim, and whether it is good copy or not is decided by, for example, a marketing director who just prefers, you know, decides he prefers this one to that one. Okay, does that ring bells with people? Yeah, very much so. Very standard sort of thing. You know, a marketing director, a marketing team will say, right, we've decided to run this campaign tomorrow. We need the copy by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Hurry up and eat your lunch. Do it now. So yeah, a fair few people sort of saying, yeah, that kind of sounds familiar. Yeah. In the ideal world of writing, what we would do is write things carefully. We would split test them. We would do all this kind of detailed research on what works and what doesn't, because behavioural economics teaches us, as Rory was just saying, that very small things can make a difference. But day to day, especially in a corporate environment, the priority, my shoelaces are undone, make sure I don't fall over, please. That would be embarrassing. The priority is just to get stuff through the door. Okay? So working in these corporate environments, I've been interested in stuff that you can do to make your copy more likely to work fresh out of the door. Okay? It's never going to go through a testing process. If it's a letter that's going to 50,000 Eon customers about the guy who is coming to change their meter in 2 weeks' time, it's just going to go out tomorrow. You've got no choice in the matter. You would like to persuade the operations guys to do it differently, but that's how it's working, so it's got to work. How can we make it work? Now, one of the ways that we have been trying to do that in the past few years has been to try to write in a good tone of voice. And in particular, we talk about the virtues of clear tone of voice and warm tone of voice. And tone of voice is, the big buzzword around copywriting, and has been for, I guess getting on for a decade now. And the idea is that we write these letters in a friendly and a warm and a human and conversational way, and that is better, and we'll get better results than the sort of very officious style of copywriting that often gets done in-house. Okay, so you'll go into a lot of corporations and find that ops teams often write their own letters. So the engineering manager, who is sending out the guy to change the meter, will sit down and say, I need to write a letter, blah, blah, blah. Dear customer, please be advised that on the 13th of September, one of our operatives will be visiting your premises in order to renew the electricity measuring facility that you have appended to your wall. Okay? And of course, Joe customer gets it. And what happens with these is that a new operations manager comes along and says, that's a bit crap, I need to add a thing about how he'll come in a blue van. And that goes on. And you end up with this letter that's 100 pages long and makes no sense to anybody. And then, of course, Joe the engineer goes and knocks on the door, and you open it, who the hell are you? I didn't know. A letter? Don't know anything about that. So the solution to that has been to use a nice, warm, clear, friendly tone of voice, not just in operations, but in debt recovery, in marketing. Okay, you still see an incredible amount of crap copy written in a marketing context, especially by big corporates. And I've been going into these businesses for years and say, look, if you just treat your customers like they're human, if you just write as if you were talking to them, it doesn't mean you have to be matey, you can be friendly and respectful. If you were just to write how you were talking to them, how you would talk to them, they will get it much quicker. And I know that to be true, okay? So, Rory was identifying this problem of stuff that we know instinctively to be true, but it's difficult to persuade, the in-house guys, the finance guys, the operations guys, that this is the case. You get these situations where people say, well, no, we can't write it like that. We've always done it like this. Yeah? These myths and these ideas about how companies ought to sound perpetuate themselves within businesses. So I thought, okay, what we need to do is some research. At this stage, I'd already become interested in the psychology of copywriting. And in particular, I'd become interested in the work of Daniel Kahneman. Are people, I'm guessing, familiar with Kahneman? Okay, so Rory was talking about System 1, System 2 thinking. In very, very brief summary, Daniel Kahneman is a hugely famous behavioural psychologist, done an awful lot of his work in tandem with a guy called Amos Tversky. And he wrote a book based on his and Tversky's work called Thinking Fast and Slow. And Kahneman's basic idea is that each of us have in our brains two systems, System 1 and System 2. Yeah? They're not left and right, they're not, separate parts of the brain, but, it's a model of how the brain works. And System 1 is your very primitive, your very instinctive, your fight and flight sort of mechanism. It's you being, the animal, if you like. System 2 is much more about reason, rationality, informed decision-making. Yeah? Now, all of us have those two systems working all the time. The key thing is that System 1 is much easier to operate than System 2. If we want to be rational, if we want to make careful, informed decisions, that takes more effort. System 2 is more of a bind for us to run. It's much easier for us to default to System 1. Okay? Now, the context in which I became particularly interested in this was debt letters. Okay? Scary. Does anyone write debt letters here? Yeah, one or two hands coming up. They're a difficult thing to do, and the traditional approach to debt letters has always been to write a really scary, nasty letter. Dear customer, please be advised that we're going to come and beat your door down with an axe unless you pay us within the next 5 days. It's not quite that dramatic, but it's not far off. Court action will ensue if you do not settle your account with us by such and such a date. And after a while, I'd read a Kahneman, and I thought about these letters, and I thought what we're doing here, these big scary letters with these long words and the long, hard-to-read paragraphs, what we're doing is triggering people's system 1. Okay? You see it, it's scary, it's in red, fight or flight. It is a tiger. I'm going to run away or climb a tree, or I'm going to try and attack it with my club. Okay? That's all it's doing is triggering the kind of reptilian brain response. And the problem with that is that then you have people who are not making rational decisions. Okay? What we want to try to do is to trigger system 2, where people are saying, hold on, perhaps maybe it is in my best interest at least to talk to this organisation and see if I can come to some sort of arrangement with them. And usually it is. If anyone's worked in corporate debt particularly, you'll know it's always in the customer's interest to phone up and do some sort of deal, even if it ends up being, paying £1 a week for the next 50 years or whatever. So I got to thinking, is there a way that, especially in these high pressure situations, we can prove that a warm tone of voice, a friendly, human accessible approach to copywriting is actually better than this very officious old style way of doing it? Is there something that I can show to the arithmocracy, to use Rory's phrase, that proves to them in numbers that this way of doing it is better? I know that big agencies have already done research like this, but there's not much research like this in the public domain. So let's do some. And that's where I started working with the Wales Centre for Behaviour Change. Do you want to tell them about the experiment, or shall I?
Yeah, I can talk through it, what we actually did.
Okay.
Have you got the
clickery
thing?
Do you want the clicker?
I'll move over this
before we do, let's just
see if it works.
That WCBC logo.
And so this is just showing we're a multidisciplinary team, behavioural psychologist, kind of neuroscientist based at Bangor University, and we work with people like Bill and businesses to do this kind of research into behaviour change strategies. So Bill came to us and we looked at, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to test it out? And we had this natural test bed, excuse the audio there, of students, graduating students with outstanding library debts. So every year, Bangor University Library and Archive Service lose thousands and thousands of pounds through students just graduating and not bringing back books. And so we thought, right, excellent, we've got the students just about to graduate, let's see if we can target them with this study. And so we had these students, and they had two different types of debt. They had those that had books and fines that had accrued over the year, and those that just had fines. And so the library, throughout the year, they'll send out like their routine emails of, please come and bring your books back. But then just before graduation, they'll send out a warning email, and that goes to the university email address. And then they send out a warning letter to about a week or two before graduation to those who have still not paid, kind of, really, you have to bring back the books. And this is what we were using. And we kind of had, the main aim of the study was to explore this kind of more formal, businessy, traditional copy that they tended to use compared to this warmer, more open tone of voice type copy that Bill's been talking about.
So just to dip in there, in our language, if you like, businessy is the nasty stuff that your operations guys write without your supervision. Warm is the sort of stuff that you as an internal copywriter or a freelancer would instinctively write, probably, if you're a decent copywriter, which you all are, and is much more friendly and accessible and human and open. So we've used those kind of quite silly words, businessy and warm, and they're just a sort of shorthand for what we're talking about. Sorry.
No, not at all. And I'm trying not to embarrass Bill here at all, but neither Phil or I are copywriters in any way, so please excuse our ignorance if we're not using the terms appropriately or anything. So we set up this study anyway. And then we designed 2 different types of copy, and we ideally wanted to have a test group, like a kind of control group, which would be the standard copy that was sent out. But we had to jump through so many hoops with the compliance of ethics. I don't know if many of you are familiar with compliance boards and everything, and tedious. So because our copy, both versions, were considered better than the original one, it was then not ethical to send out the basic baseline one. So we ended up just having these 2 kind of comparative groups. And also we were working within the constraints of the existing system. So the library email system allowed you to send out 6 lines of text in their emails. And so we thought, well, this isn't going to give a very robust study here. We're not going to get a very good comparison between the copy. So we thought, right, we'll have a web page that's got the 2 different types of copy, send out the standard email, and it's just got a link to the different copies. And that way we can compare it more robustly. And then the letter that was sent out afterwards was basically exactly the same as the copy, just for cohesiveness and making sure it was all valid. And you have copies of the copy in your pack. Yeah, it's probably worth reading out what the original email was, and then what our one.
So what we've got here is on your little sort of handout sheet are the two letters. They ended up being web pages. The 2 letters that we sent out.
So I should just say it's on the supplementary material page.
On this one.
The other one's just the kind of more scientific abstract one.
Yeah, so there is, if anyone doesn't believe what we're saying, we included the scientific abstract as well. So we sent people an email that sent them to 1 of 2 of these pages, okay? And most people, the great thing about experimenting on students is that they're a reasonable approximation for normal human beings. So they sort of did what we wanted them to, and most of them went to 1 of the other pages. So first we had the businessy test copy. Overdue fines and outstanding stock. Deep breath. In order to enable us to offer optimal service to all users of the library, all outstanding stock is to be returned and all monies owed are required to be paid by the end of your course. Non-payment of fines and inappropriate retention of library materials will in some circumstances result in the university taking appropriate action to recover the outstanding debt. The specific action taken will be commensurate, I was really pleased with that, to the level of outstanding debt. If you're in this category, you must clear all fines and return all stock by date, or the university authorities will be alerted to the situation. Any action taken as a result of the non-settlement of debts could potentially jeopardise any job or course offers you may have. And then details about how to take it back. I really enjoyed writing that.
And bearing in mind, this was an improvement.
That was an improvement.
Considering the ethics board considered this an improvement.
I thought it was better. You do?
We've got the original email, but we weren't allowed to provide the original copy of the letter.
Well, we'll talk about embarrassment and compliance in a second, actually, because that is quite an interesting feature of this study. And then we had the warm test copy, okay, over the page. Settling your account with the library. Every year, I'm going to read this one in full because this is where we try to put our behaviour change principles into action. Every year we have to chase departing students for unreturned items and outstanding fines. As you can imagine, it's hard to improve our service to students when we have to spend our funds replacing books that people have forgotten to return. If you still have any of our books, or there are fines you haven't paid, you need to get in touch with us now. The university authorities may take action against you to recover the debts you owe. This might affect your plans, any plans you have for employment or further study. What you need to do. You can bring books to any library site in Bangor, the main library, Daniel Road, or the normal site. You can return books anonymously by using our self-serve machines. You don't have to see us library staff again if you don't want to. You can post them to us at the address below. If you do send books by post, please do it by registered delivery so you have proof. Paying fines is easy. You can pay in cash anonymously using our self-serve machines, or you can pay in cash or by card, but not cheque, at any of the 3 sites in Bangor. Alternatively, blah blah, give us a call. Lost items. If you think you've lost any items you've borrowed and searching under the sofa only unearthed a dust balls, get in touch as soon as you can so we can talk through the options open to you. As Bangor library staff, every day we see how hard you and other students work to get your degrees. We really don't want something as simple as overdue books to spoil your achievements. So act now and give yourself peace of mind. just to talk about some of the principles and difficulties that went into that. That is not precisely the copy that I wrote for this letter. That's because it had to go through an ethics committee who said, oh, I can't say that, can't say that. And to start with, this annoyed me, but then I thought, well, hang on, when we write copy, often it's going through compliance teams, it's going through managerial sign-off, it often gets tinkered about with. So actually this makes it, if anything, more realistic. It's not quite the copy I would have ideally sent out, but it's close.
The library service as well changed their mind about what we could and could not say.
Yeah. So it was awkward. And yes, and they were very sensitive about, we don't want our original letter going out because it was really controversial and got loads of complaints. They still will not tell us exactly how much money was owed in total because it's so embarrassing. Tony Heaton, the manager from the library, all he will say to me is, Bill, it's thousands. Yeah. Tens of thousands of pounds every year.
And this is across all universities as well.
And this is across all universities. So, a really interesting project in that we're potentially helping to save universities across the UK millions of pounds a year. Anyway, as copywriters, you can probably see some of the things I'm trying to do in that letter that don't happen in the original. Does anyone want to give me any suggestions? Sorry, go on.
Rapport.
Yeah, there's rapport. So, any particular technique that I'm using there?
Yeah, by explaining personal accountability, aren't you? Their actions actually affecting other students like themselves. So
right.
It's empathy with people of a similar social group.
Yeah, so it's rapport, personal accountability. Any others?
You turn the library staff into sympathetic characters where they talk about our books, they have something, and you've also offered the reward of giving them peace of mind,
yeah.
So they get a benefit.
Precisely, so there's a clear benefit in there. We're humanising the library staff.
Framing the effort they put into their degree against the tiny amount of damage.
Absolutely.
Damage might get done.
Yeah. So we're putting it in context, and that's an important thing. We're going to come back to that idea of context, because so much copy never considers context.
I mean, it's a lot more kind of active sentence structure,
right.
And use of the kind of second person to involve them in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, classic tone of voice things, active sentence structure, lots of you. The magic word of copy, you, is there all the time. Sarah?
It's not so judgmental.
Right.
You're not actually talking to a judgment and being bad people.
Right. That's interesting as well. Precisely when we're not being remotely judgmental in this copy.
It's taking away the distance. The other one is incredibly distant and adversarial. Whereas this one is just, she's sitting next to them.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. It's much more human.
We're in this together.
Yeah, we're in this together. That's not to say that it lacks firmness. There's still talk of consequences, but it is significantly softer. Okay? And other standard things, shorter paragraphs, easy to read, nice clear subheadlines, all the stuff that you and I would always do instinctively as good copywriters to make stuff readable, compared with this enormous, great big, your eyes just roll off it, don't they? Okay. Shall we have a look at the results?
We'll just talk about the behaviour change principles, because as Bill was saying, these are the things that you might do instinctively as copywriters. You're kind of using your heuristics to, this works. So what we did, Phil and I, is we came in with the behaviour change principles. Okay, so you're trying to make it more approachable, easier to read and everything, but what is this in terms of behaviour change? And we applied this framework, it's called New Idea, that the Wales Centre of Behaviour Change have developed to start looking at behaviour change within an easier framework. And Phil's going to talk about that after. It's just a really useful metric that we apply to this. So it's kind of looking at the now, what's the problem at the moment, and who it is you're trying to target. But basically this was a framework that we applied the behaviour change principles to, and Phil will talk about that. And from doing this, we identified these particular behaviour change principles, which are exactly the things that you've just talked about when you've noticed the warm copy, but just in the more academic terms. So for example, salience, we are naturally drawn to what's obvious, what's new, and what's relevant to us. So this, like we were making in the warm copy, certain aspects of it more salient. The information was much more obvious, much more relevant to the students. Affect, it's that kind of emotional response to a stimuli. So it was the emotional response, this kind of surrounding Bangor University, your experience. And it was that emotional effect we were trying to tap into.
Can I just dive in there? One of the interesting advantages that we have as Bangor is we have one of the very highest student satisfaction rates in the UK. It's absolutely vast. And there's a huge fondness for the university among its students. So that was...
So we tapped into that assumption
tried to tap
that
into that
would have
assumption
a kind of...
people would have the good feelings.
Yeah, and whether they didn't at the start, the kind of cognitive dissonance of going through 3 years of hard labour, you would think at the end there'd be some sort of affection to the university because they've stuck it out. And then there was the feedback as well, and this is quite important, is in providing some method or some ability in your copy that they can learn about the consequences, they can learn about the outcome of what their action or inaction will be. So this was talking about what would happen if they didn't act. And the incentive for them. What is the incentive for them to act? And with the businessy copy, it was a negative incentive. It was a negative, extrinsic, kind of punitive, you will be punished type of incentive. And that's often what's used in kind of traditional type of copy. It's all punitive language. But in the warm one, we tried to make it a bit more intrinsic. So the incentive was, you don't want to do something bad. You want to do something, go with what's right, return your books, provide a good service for other students. So that's just something to think about. And then these were in the kind of bigger psychological principles of effort and motivation. So effort, make it easy. Make the behaviour that you want to change easy to do and make it easy to understand. And motivation is basically just the value of the behaviour. If people have no value for the behaviour, there's not going to be any incentive to make them do it. So it's just kind of, these were the more academic-y principles that we applied, but are exactly what you've noticed in the different versions of the copy.
One of the things I'm interested in is how, as copywriters, we kind of have our folklore. The idea, and it's proven folklore that has been tried and tested over the years. So we talk about, benefits rather than features or all of that kind of thing. And it's interesting to see how this marries up with academics' ideas of, how the human brain works. Mm-hmm. So let's have a look at the method and the results. And
by all means, just if you have any questions throughout it, please put your hands up. So in total there were 472 students just before graduation who still hadn't paid off their debts. And so we split these randomly into the two groups, and the library did this so the researchers weren't able to kind of fiddle anything. There was no bias introduced. And so 50% went in one and 50% went in the other. And this just meant that, but by randomization, it was so any kind of underlying characteristics of the students that might motivate them to return the books, other than our test, were kind of randomly...
So cultural difference, particularly for foreign students, was the big worry, wasn't it?
So whether there was just underlying things. And the amount of debt that they had as well was kind of even between the groups. So they were basically the same. And so these were the headline results, and it's really interesting. We didn't expect such a good result, if I'm honest. Just from making the small changes to these two different copies, 65% of all those students that got the warm copy paid off their debts, compared to only 53% of those in the businessy copy. And this is statistically significant. And as Bill mentioned, that 12% difference actually equates to thousands and thousands of pounds.
It's a 5-figure sum, as I understand it,
So it's statistically significant, but it's actually financially significant for the library in that difference. And I guess there were 3 main outcomes of the study. So not only were the warm group more likely to respond, they had less debt outstanding at the end. And I can't say exactly how much difference there was, because another quirk of the system was it updates the students' records every time they do something. So it would wipe off their debt at the start each time they acted, so we couldn't get that difference. But the debt outstanding at the end was less, statistically significantly less. And they also responded a lot quicker. So the students that got the warm copy responded on average after 19.5 days, whereas those that got the businessy one, it was about 22 days, and that was on average. And again, that was statistically significant. So basically, the warm copy, they're responding quicker, paying off more potentially, and more of them were responding. And this was really quite interesting. And then we got really, really good feedback from the library. And basically, we've been contracted to continue the work with them and roll it out amongst their other communications. And they want Bill involved in this, so we have really good feedback on it, obviously because we're saving them money. But also the library staff, because they were privy to what students were in each group, they reported fewer complaints from students in the warm copy group. They had a better quality of response, so those that were paying off their fines and bringing their books back were less tetchy and were less kind of complaining about it, and the library staff were getting less hassle. And interestingly, they were getting more phone calls from students saying, "Oh, I've gone home, I have my books at home, when I come back for graduation, I promise I'll pay, I'm so sorry." So they had these kind of better intentions. And then whether they actually followed up on it is a different matter. And that's a kind of value-action gap that's quite big in kind of nudge theory and everything. So there were these interesting anecdotal accounts coming from the library. But overall, it's been a really positive study. And I think it's just showing that you can do these quite quick studies just to get that evidence to show your boss, to show your company that what I'm doing works here, kind of. But yeah, let Bill.
So through doing the study, we learned the amazing lesson that if you're nice to people, they are more likely to do what you want. Which, and again, to us, is like common sense. But you talk to your clients, to small business clients, to finance directors, to operations people, and because those guys are very sort of process focused, they see all this as part of a process, so they see it all in the language of business and the process of business, and tend to be quite hostile. I expect some of you have come across this, to this idea of being nice to people. We should be professional, is the expression I always heard. Yeah, people have come across that. We need to sound professional. And I always say, look, you can sound professional but still be warm and friendly. So the whole framework for this, I'm going to get Phil to talk about this in a second, was New Idea, the behavioural psychology, behavioural economics framework that the Wales Centre for Behaviour Change has been developing. Now environment, who, impact, reward, evidence, action. It's capital NEWID because newid is the Welsh verb to change. Okay, so if you ever do anything in Wales, everything has to be in English and Welsh, and so you always try and get the Welsh angle in if you can. So new idea, now environment, who, impact, reward, evidence, action. I'm just going to leave that up while I say, does anyone have any questions on anything we have so far? Anything we've said so far? Go on.
Are you allowed to tell us what the compliance people have changed about your company?
Yeah, let's
They
think.
started off, because in their original copy, in the kind of businessy type one, we wanted to say, we'll hold back your graduation. We won't be allowed to graduate, because that's what they were, which I was not supposed to say. Was
forget.
Yes, was what they were saying before, and then they changed it. Actually, no, we're not going to do that anymore. That's against our policy. So that was one thing that we had to change.
I mean, well, there were several things. So we had to go through two layers of compliance. First of all, the library itself, who said, we can't use this thing about people can't graduate anymore because they cry if we don't let them graduate and things.
But I got told that at uni.
But
I didn't know
it's a story that does the rounds.
Yeah.
The other thing that was taken out, and this was because of the students' union also got involved. Damn students, I have unions and everything these days. And they said, because one of the things I wanted to do was say, give a percentage, even if it was made up, as to the number of other students who have done this to do the sort of
social norm.
the social norm effect. But the student union wasn't having this, because when I actually looked at the figures, they were kind of embarrassingly low for the number of people who were paying on time. And so we would have had to pump them up somehow. So that was all kind of quashed. But ideally, one of the things I would have done in there would have been try to get some sort of social norm thinking in, and that isn't there. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Go on.
You might be about to say this, but in the second letter, you've changed quite a lot. So you have changed the tone, but you've changed the content, you've changed the structure.
Well, fundamentally, the information provided in both is the same.
But stuff like the reasons to persuade,
So I know we've changed quite a lot, so we could go back and be like, right, well...
Shall we let the chap finish his question?
Yeah, so I was going to ask, have you got any read on which bit of that is motivating the behaviour change most? Is it the salience, or is it the affect? Or
At the minute, no. So this is the classic academic term that I've learnt. Further research needs to be done. Further research needs to be done. So what we need to do next time with next year's cohort is now that we know warm works, is to split further and deeper.
What works,
if you like.
And also like to try and work out the context as well, because there was an interesting anomaly. We've got another question as well. An anomaly in that there was actually these part responders, which we didn't anticipate. So there were people that had the books and the fines. Some of them would return the book, but then not pay the fine. And this was true in both of the groups. So that would be an interesting one to explore as to whether, okay, so we've got this kind of bell curve, we're getting these people. How do we get these people? By using the same copy for them all.
I mean, you can kind of surmise that. So someone's got a book, and keeping a book feels like stealing.
Yeah.
Not paying somebody doesn't feel like stealing. So utility companies have, I don't know if anyone's ever worked with any utilities, but utilities have this problem all the time. People don't see us taking electricity for free as stealing, because it's not, as far as they're concerned. So I would assume that it is a different perception of the things that are stolen. Rory?
Funnily enough, on that perception of stealing thing, generally, if you give people too much change from a family-owned shop, they know nothing.
Right.
If you're part of a chain like WH, they don't. So one way to enforce norms here might be for it to come from a very small part of the library network.
That's interesting.
Just two things that I've got to go.
That's right.
One of them is brilliant logo, which I assume is the dragon's tail.
It is.
Thank you.
Many Saxons in the room who are responsible. Okay, it's a fantastic logo. Second thing, if you look at the difference in percentage between those returns, what you've got to factor in there is it's actually a much bigger effect than it may appear in percentage terms. My guess is that 20% of each group just can't pay at all, right? So if you look at what you might call the people on the margin, actually the proportionate effect of people who can pay but might not is a much bigger effect once you strip out those 20% of people who just haven't got the money, so there's nothing to do, or they've totally lost the book. Because I said this again with the government's work on tax, there are a lot of people there who can't pay their tax. They get it up from sort of, if you get it from 64 to 78, that's actually a much more significant difference
than it seems to be.
In the blurry zone.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's part of what you can do. Thank you for saying. With the copy as well, is identifying that. It's like, okay, you can have a wider impact than maybe what your initial remit is. So in this, it's not just getting people to pay, but it's those people who genuinely couldn't pay because they don't have the money to come forward and be like, I can't, is there anything I can do? How do I sort this out? Rather than living with that fear. So it's that kind of wider responsibility that you have, and you have the power to do that.
One thing I would like to do, just didn't occur to me the first time, is to say, if you genuinely cannot pay, get in touch. And because again, that would be mirroring a situation that often happens, especially with utility companies, where a deal can always be done. But people think, I mean, again, you will know this. People look at big brands especially and see them as these huge monstrous behemoths and think, oh no, I couldn't possibly cut a deal with, British Gas, poor little me. And again, the humanising process helps that. Any little questions before we go on to new idea? Go on.
Sorry, but in the One area for further study that might be interesting is instead of sending the letter out anonymously, actually have it from a named friendly person.
Yeah. It is sent out from the library, but I think they use their Bangor University Library and Archive Service badge. I think that would be really interesting. I think if there was a named representative.
And a picture of the name, like Smiley Tony Heaton, please pay your fines, could work. Yeah, I hope you're writing all this down. We need to remember it for next year. Was someone else over here? No? Okay. Phil, do you want to talk us quite quickly, because well, it's not a question running out of time.
Because we find it really relevant to this study, and it seems quite appropriate for the kind of behaviour change stuff, we thought it would be useful for you guys to take something away from our session.
What I'm just mindful of is I want people to be able to talk and ask questions and stuff afterwards. So super light speed.
I'm going to give you the... I don't really need it, do we? No. So I'm going to give you a quick run through of this model. Initially, when the Wales Centre for Behaviour Change was founded, part of the thing we wanted to do was provide sort of training and consultancy for businesses and individuals who wanted to change behaviour but who weren't technical specialists. So I have a degree and a master's, and I'm also working on a PhD in behaviour change. So I'm very well equipped to do this without any particular tools like this. But we realise obviously that people out there who haven't got time or who don't have the technical knowledge need to be able to do this behaviour change, but can't do with reading through academic journals. So initially we started using the mind space framework, which some of you may have heard of, some of you might not. This was developed by the British government's nudge unit. And the idea was that it went through a few of the sort of social psychology and behavioural psychology principles, things like motivation, incentives, norms, salience, priming, affect, commitment, ego, all that sort of stuff. And we initially used that with some of our clients, but we found that it was actually a bit too erudite for them. It was a bit too abstract, and we were really struggling to get it down to the brass tacks for them. So we actually developed an alternative model, and the alternative model we developed was New Idea. Now, I have to confess, we came up with the name first, because it sounded good. This is a common practice in academia. A lot of professors, a lot of very well-known professors will actually come up with snazzy names for their projects and then fit words in to make it fit. That actually happens. So we had New Idea. This was a tagline we'd come up with because of the NOID and because it worked. Unfortunately, we could not come up with a word that began with D that explained reward. New Idea kind of sounds like a urinary tract infection. So we wanted to stay away from that. So it sticks out a bit, but that's the way it is. People don't seem to have a problem with it, really. So the first question I've got for you really is, who of you have seen House, MD? Yeah, with Hugh Laurie? Yeah, quite a few of you. If you don't know about it, where have you been living, really? Because it was very popular when it was on. It was about a doctor, a genius doctor who worked in a hospital, and he had a team under him, and they diagnosed unusual and bizarre illnesses. And the idea was that these were the problems nobody else could solve. They got him in, and after a few jokes and a bit of drama, they solved it. And the way they solved it, primarily, was by doing what they called differential diagnosis. They got the team in a room, and they started writing down everything they knew about the person. Everything about their home life, their work life, their history, anything going on inside them, any psychological problems, everything. They got it all out onto the table and worked through it. New Idea is our diagnostic process. It's our diagnostic tool. This is the first thing we go to when a client comes to us with a problem. We lay a New Idea on the table, we say, this is what it is, let's work through it. And the reason we developed it like this is because it's simple. It's easy to use. It can be done the way we do it, in a kind of a deep, more perhaps philosophical analysis where we work through with a client for several hours or months even. But it can also be used as a really quick checklist. So it works. If you've got 2 hours to finish a piece of work, this can take you 10 minutes once you've got to grips with it to just tick through and go, have we covered that? Have we looked at that? Have we thought of that? And through it goes, and it can just bring some focus and a little bit of clarity to the work that you do. Now, hopefully, you will find it useful. And if you have any questions about it, because this is a really quick rush through, you can see I'm speaking quite quickly. This is a very quick run through, so the chances are you probably won't grasp it completely. If you want to know more, get in touch with us. and we can arrange something.
Details in the
details in the pack. Yeah, there's a business card and there's all sorts of stuff. Okay, so let's begin with now. Now is about the current context. So this is the first thing you want to do when you're looking at changing someone's behaviour, when you're looking at affecting some kind of change. The first thing you have to do is get to grips with what's happening now. So it's about an objective look at the world. And we do this by asking some questions. You know, we say, what is actually happening? What's going on? What are we seeing? We're not trying to judge it. We're not trying to analyse it. We're not trying to kind of come up with solutions already. You know, one of the problems is people tend to jump to solutions because it's easy. We have these cognitive pathways that just fire. When we see a problem, we think, that's what we've got to do. That's how we fix it.
And that was something we find a lot with our clients, is they'd be coming in and be like, yeah, we want to get to here. We want to be here, and this is what we want to do. It's like, wait, let's just rein it back, and where are you now? What is the actual problem? I don't know if that's something you face, that coming up against your bosses or the companies, it's like, you need to be here now, but we're here
People
now,
come with a solution already, and they think it's the problem. They go, we need to run a campaign to get people to speak more Welsh, and we want to do it with posters. How do we do it? And that's not the problem. The problem is, how do we encourage people to speak more Welsh? The problem with our project was, how do we get people to return their books and debts? What we asked first was, what's actually happening? We didn't make any assumptions. So we said, what's happening? Well, students aren't returning their books. Somewhere, they're coming up against a block. They're not doing it either because of something that's occurring internally or something within the environment. And that leads on to the next point, the environment. Now, as a behavioural psychologist, I have a particular love for the environment. Not the green, the green grass and no nuclear power environment. I'm talking about the environment as in everything around us. It's a technical definition, and it just means anything that affects our behaviour. You know, as a behavioural psychologist, I'm very suspicious of what we call sort of internal drives, this kind of folklore psychology that has kind of bled into the consciousness, and we all think it's just true because it sounds intuitively correct. So things like, he hit someone because he felt mad. Now that's common sense, right? Yeah, you hit someone because you felt mad. Not true. You felt mad and you hit someone. The reason you felt mad was something in the environment triggered it. You lost a bet, your car got broken into, something like that. And that's how we think about it. We get clients to think about the environment, what's actually happening. If it's a physical space problem, it might be, is it because the chairs are arranged in a certain way? Is it because the door's in the wrong place? Is it because the offices are facing the wall when they should be facing the window? Stuff like that.
In our kind of context, what environment covers is, what is the situation of the person we're communicating with? So many corporate comms, so much corporate copywriting does not consider the condition of the person we're writing to. If we're sending out a debt letter, these guys haven't paid their debts. Why? There's a reason. People don't just not pay their electricity bill.
Your letter is not going to be the only letter landing on their table.
Yeah.
So we think about the environment of the person, and we think about what's happening to them, where are they? With the students in our project, we had to think about what were they facing? They were facing stress at finishing the degree. They may have moved home already or moved away. They may have, all sorts of other debts, all sorts of other pressures. They may be feeling particularly resentful towards the university that's charged them what they perceive to be high fees. And they may think, well, I've paid 30 grand for this degree. I'm going to take this book, even though I'll never read it, and it'll just get thrown away. But we're dealing with all those kind of factors, and we can never know for sure because we're dealing with a large population. But just by thinking about it, we can bring clarity to what we want to do. So we can start thinking of solutions. Who is about who's involved in the change. It's not just who's actually going to be changing their behaviour. So for us, the basic level of who was the students. That's whose behaviour we want to change. But we also need to think about the staff working in the library. And we need to think about even us as the researchers and the designers. Well, how is our behaviour affecting the whole thing? People aren't as important in systems as you might actually think. The environment is way more important to triggering behaviour. But if we understand people, if we understand who we're actually talking to, who we're targeting, we can actually avoid some sort of common problems.
For in our one, part of the who was, well, if we're sending a letter to the home address, will the parents actually pick it up? So it wasn't just, right, well, we're just getting the students. It might be that the parents are going to be reading the letter. So that might be a kind of similar context. It might not just be this one person that you're targeting. You're maybe actually getting the other family members who are opening the letter or that kind of thing. So it's just thinking a little bit outside of the immediate audience.
Yeah. The next factor is impact. And impact is a bit deeper. Because the obvious impact of any behaviour change intervention is the behaviour change itself. So when you set out a sort of a strategy for changing people's behaviour, the immediate thing you think of is the outcome will be that their behaviour is changed. So with these students, the immediate impact was that they would return their books and pay their fines. That's the obvious level, that's the shallow level, but people rarely go deeper. We rarely think about the actual broader impact. And Rory talked about the butterfly effect. And I use the kind of cliche of ripples on a pond. It's the same principle. Call it the law of unintended consequences. There's always unintended consequences, no matter what you do. If we change their behaviour, that has a ripple effect, and it affects other things. Now, generally speaking, it's going to be positive. If you're affecting a positive behaviour change, it's going to be positive. If you're targeting people with debt, chances are they're stressed, they're cutting costs in other places. They've got all sorts of problems going on. You're not just stressed. You're not just in debt in isolation of the rest of your life. Everything else is probably crumbling around you if you have that much debt. So we have to look at the ripple effect. If somebody pays off their debts or works it out, then their life gets better. And all this kind of stuff goes along with it. Now that's nice to think about, but there can be negative consequences. I'm not going to go into it because it's a bit of a bummer and this is a kind of a fun session, supposedly, theoretically. But there can be negative consequences. There can be unintended consequences to the work that you do and the work that we do with our experiments. So it's worth thinking about what is the potential impact, not only to the person who's changing their behaviour, but also to the business involved or the library service in our case, to the people around them.
So I guess it's just thinking beyond your immediate target of what you're trying to do. It's like, are there going to be little spillover things?
Yeah. Fun little anecdote with that is a company we worked with wanted to increase communication amongst the staff. So they wanted to get the staff to be sort of more talkative amongst themselves and sort of hierarchically as well. And so they wanted that, and they just kind of rushed in with it a bit and just basically said to everyone, you can come and talk to us, you can come and suggest these things. They made it kind of fun and interesting, and it was all very progressive and very modern and great. Except every morning there was a queue of people waiting outside this office to talk to the manager every day. And people would just come in like a revolving door service. They would just not work, basically. They would sit around and chat all the time. And, they were communicating great. The outcome was fantastic. They communicated. They just didn't do anything else. And that's an example of the unintended consequences. The people who designed it never thought beyond that. I mean, we fixed the problem, obviously. But they never thought beyond that, beyond the bounds of that initial change. So it's worth thinking about. On to reward. We all know what rewards are. It's kind of instinctive. It's fine, I'll rush through. We're good. Rewards are we know what rewards are. They're instinctive. It's food, it's money, it's social praise, these kind of things. Obviously, as copywriters, you don't always exactly have control over what the reward is. And sometimes you're not even really offering a reward. You're just telling them that, a ton of bricks is going to fall on them if they don't get their arse in gear. So this is kind of a tricky one. But what we did with this letter, because we couldn't really access any rewards. I mean, a really surefire way to get all the students to return their books and pay their debts is offer them £100 for doing it. And they would have done it. But so would everyone else. They would have gone into the library, taken a book out, and then returned it and got £100. And it would have cost the university thousands of millions of pounds, and it would have been a disaster. It would have worked from a research point of view, but it would have been a disaster. No, what we did is we actually identified an intangible reward. Because we essentially paired the university, the identity of the university, with this positive copy. Yeah. And we made it friendly and open and much more receptive. And you all know...
the sense of doing the right thing.
Yeah, you all know how hard it is to screw over a friend. Nobody wants to cheat on a friend. Nobody wants to be mean to a friend. We go out of our way, a bit more altruistically, basically, when it comes to our friends. Now, the university...
Worth saying, that Phil says, we did this, we did that with copy. I just wrote what I considered to be good copy. So I didn't do what Phil is describing consciously. So he's kind of identified that effect post hoc, as it were.
Yeah, that's basically the scientific principle that you are tapping into as copywriters. It's what Rory was saying. You know all this stuff. You just don't have the technical definitions that we're giving it, but you know it all, and we're codifying it basically for you, hopefully in a helpful way, perhaps not.
But it just means that you can, that's what I loved about this study, was well, you're doing this, we're just showing your employers or something that you were doing it, kind of thing.
That it works, that it's the right thing, that it's not based on a hunch or a myth or anything, that it's actual fact. So we paired this and created this kind of positive relationship. And so the reward for the students was paying the books back because it was doing something nice. Mm-hmm. And it is intangible, and in a sense it's hypothetical. We don't know exactly that this happened. But in a sense we do, because there's a lot of scientific research that suggests that this is the case, and it's very unlikely that they just all had a burst of altruism for no reason, and our letter was just coincidental. Evidence and action are two that kind of lump together, in a sense, and they are perhaps less relevant to you as copywriters. But if you are doing any kind of behaviour change at all, these are very important to consider. Evidence, because without evidence, you don't know that what you've done has any effect. We're working with a client who's working with another behaviour change organisation as well, in a kind of triumvirate, and they said in our meeting that they had no idea whether the other client's intervention was working. They had no idea. They just thought it was. It sounded good. It cost them like 80 grand, this intervention, and they had no idea whether it was working or not. And apparently that's common. So, we're all in the wrong industry. We should be doing that. If you take evidence, you take numbers, figures, you think, how will we know that this has had an effect? Operationalize it. Think about what will people have to do that's visible, that we can see, that will make it true. Now, obviously, with stuff like debt collection, paying the debt is the obvious one, and I'm sure you can come up with your own answers there. And action is about what you're actually going to do. When we work with businesses, this is the one that they normally stick on, because what are they going to do? They've just had all this knowledge that we've given them, we've helped them work out, but then how are they going to turn that into actual behaviour change? And again, it's probably less relevant to you because, in a sense, you kind of do as you're told if you work for a corporate environment.
I guess it's more in control if you're a freelancer than you're able to.
Yeah. But the hope is that you'll go away with a bit more confidence and a bit more of a toolkit and a bit more knowledge that what you're doing is actually right, as backed by well over 60, 70 years of behavioural science. And hopefully,
can I dive in
go in.
And talk about that. Can I just have the doodah on, please? Cheers. Oh, brilliant. Magic. Lovely. So I didn't know any of this. I read Kahneman, I read the pop psychology, and the fascinating thing for me is that it gives us a context and an explanation of how what we kind of do instinctively as good copywriters and how it works. The really interesting thing I found was that the first time Phil was explaining new idea to me, I was sort of sat there, I'm a copywriter having science explained to me, my head hurt. And straight away, it sort of dawned on me, I thought, hold on, we have our own acronyms. Everyone knows AIDA? Yeah, attention, interest, desire, action. Been kind of developed within the ad and comms industry over years and years and years and years and years. And actually, it kind of marries up. Okay, so we have action in there. We have, desire, an impact. You can see commonalities between these frameworks that the academics have come up with and this kind of folkloric, albeit very well evidenced, approach to writing copy. And to me, the big message of this is context. Context is everything. So often when, I hope we as copywriters think of context, but so often our clients do not. And so much copy is written as if, and again I hope this is something that will resonate with you, as if it will land on the customer's doormat and the customer will sit down and say, oh great, a letter from TalkTalk. Ooh. And reads it very carefully, and every word. Look, I wonder why they've used a semicolon. And of course, nobody ever does that. You get a letter lands on your doormat, you rip it open. What the hell's this? Blah blah blah.
goes straight to
it goes straight to the bin. Yeah, I mean, if you ever hear Andy Maslin talk, he says, I write junk mail. Most of what I write goes in the bin, and he's absolutely right. But part of the art of the direct sales copywriter is making sure that people do read, and all the little tricks that have been developed over the years. The free pen in the envelope and the headline on the outside of the envelope are all ways that we in the industry have kind of groped blindly towards these behaviour change principles. If there's actually a pen there, some bright spark has thought, in the envelope, they can fill in the direct debit there and then. Okay, it's a very simple idea, and it has, I don't know the stats, but it has an impact. And what we're doing is just thinking about the context in the way that Phil and Eleanor are talking about, and thinking about the whole life of the person that we're talking to. We're nearly at lunchtime, so I'm going to... Oh, wait, well, we were running late anyway, I think. Have we got anyone decision-making type in the room? Have we got time for some questions? We probably have. First of all, is that kind of interesting? Yeah? Does anyone have any questions before we knock for lunch? I would say, obviously, all the contact details are in the bag. Get in touch. My special PCN business card is in there, which is... And theirs as well. Go on.
What kind of other problems have you kind of solved with it, with that model?
Well, we work with a whole range of different clients. So, have you got any?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky really, because we can't give too many details away, because there's a lot of confidentiality agreements with this kind of work. So obviously businesses don't want to admit that they've got problems. We've done lots of things. We've done work with basically helping
health and safety with
a lot of health and safety and productivity. Yeah, so the nuclear industry is a good example. We've done work with them to help them get to grips more with how to basically improve. Again, communication is a big one, and we found that actually a lot of problems distill down to some very simple issues, and it's most of the same issues. It's a well-being, productivity, communication issue, usually one of those, and it manifests in different ways, but ultimately that's what it is. We're helping clients improve Welsh language use in business, which is a big issue in Wales, not so much in London, but it is a big issue in Wales. And
the most glamorous one at the moment, probably, that we're applying it to is dog filing. So yeah, this is quite an exciting one for me, but it's one that it really works with, and it's with quite a number of different clients we're working with that have come to us going, God, this is a really shit issue, so let's do something about it. Yeah, I know, so bad. But yeah, so it's applicable, as you can see, to lots of different situations and contexts and different types of clients.
And you're having dramatic results, aren't you, in some of them?
Yeah, it's mostly been very positive. We've yet to have a massive failure. Yeah. So it's so far the test phase is going really well for this stuff.
Questions? Yeah, Sarah.
It's a detail, but
go on.
I don't want to sound too pert-faced, but in this warm letter, there's under sofa and a dust balls. I personally hate things like that, and I just want to understand what is the importance of putting the detail in.
Are you a 21-year-old student? Well, you certainly look it. What we wanted to do with... Okay, first rule of copy, you will never please everybody. Okay? Never please everybody. Thinking about the students, thinking about... The line was actually... Eleanor doesn't want to point the finger of blame, but I kept it because I thought this is so good. Just to humanise. And I thought...
It was really good. It seemed a bit random because there was nothing like that. I actually thought that you had more of that kind of type in the copy, and the compliance took it all out, and that was the only one.
No, they didn't touch the humour, which is unusual because obviously in a corporate context, often what goes first are your jokes. Bear
in mind our ethics committee is more looking towards is anyone going to become psychologically distressed or physically hurt by this letter,
or coming with an axe.
So it's probably less about image of the university. They weren't particularly trying to preserve a professional image. They just didn't want us to get sued by somebody for being,
But to be fair, which is often the situation with standard compliance process anyway. So it was about an attempt to humanise, I think. And I think one of the things that we will want to split down when we do the same thing next year is more comedy versus less comedy.
Because I'm kind of the same opinion. I get really irked by the kind of real kind of buddy type copy that's really popular nowadays. But it was interesting that within this context with the students, that it maybe did seem to resonate more with them.
Sure.
Oh.
Go on.
Well, the assumption seems to be that the students in this model, this particular sample is changing year by year with the cohort, and therefore may not be necessarily a very good fixed point to take to base this on. Nobody's mentioned the word coercion. In our university, using disclaimer language within all the other bumps they have to get, and it's information overload. We suggest, or more than suggest, that if they do not settle up their accounts, they will not get the transcript.
Well,
I don't see why it can't be either or. And it's a big ask for copywriters to expect that human nature is going to change simply because a buggy letter comes to the door saying we've always been your pal and we'll love you even if you don't pay. These are adults.
Yes.
You know, most people understand their responsibilities.
Yeah.
So what is wrong with the very opposite to the nice, warm language?
Well, for us it was you could no longer use it. The library changed their policy that you couldn't say you're not going to get your transcript.
Well, I would have written a nice warm letter to the people who told me to do that.
So to come to a second, one of the problems with copy, and lots of people in the room will tell you this, is you have to deal with the world as it's presented to you rather than the world as you would like it to be. But certainly I take your point.
I think one of the most important impacts on your model that you didn't really highlight enough was what you call the sort of extra benefits that the library staff, that the people are actually much more positive, much more the interaction with the people who are returning their books.
Because they're the first point of contact as well.
Positive work experience rather than those people coming, this horrible letter.
See, interestingly,
you actually
improving the quality.
I agree with you completely here in that for me,
well, it's like, well, why can't you have both? Why can't you think?
For me, being not a scientist, that anecdotal stuff was the most interesting stuff to come out of it. The fact that people are phoning up and being apparently more willing. Yes, we want the money, and that is the primary thing. There are other considerations as well. I'm thinking about the context here. Yes, we want the money, but we also, being a university, want these students to go away with a good taste in their mouth, because in future they're going to be, we hope, our donors. Like every other university in the UK, we rely on student donations quite heavily. So there were complexities there.
Bill, sorry, I think we're going to have to, Right. I think we're going to have to wrap up.
Are we?
I think we've run out of time.
Okay.
If anybody wants to talk to us over lunch or have any other questions, please do. We're around the rest of the day as well. So, thank you.